Hey, I'm Will LaVeist. He's Eric Claville. You're tuned into LaVeist and Claville. We give it to you straight the way it is from a black male's perspective. Let's get right to it. Continuing our series, Black Tax Living Middle Class. Black Tax Living Middle Class. You know, many of us who are educated business owners have been able to achieve some measure of the American dream, as it's called, home ownership and the like. We also know that it comes with a price oftentimes. And in some ways, I wouldn't say it's not all that it's cracked up to be, because I certainly would prefer to be middle class and to have opportunities that I've been afforded, you know, as a professional, than when I remember as a kid growing up in the inner city, you know, in Brownsville, Brooklyn, one of the roughest neighborhoods in New York. But it definitely comes with some challenges, especially things like raising a family, things like you expect that when you've done all of the different things that society says you're supposed to do, get a college education, stay out of legal trouble, you expect that there would be a reciprocity, in a sense that you would be able to not have to deal with certain things that come your way. But you quickly realize that very much so, a lot of the things that you would think you would have to deal with as a black man who is successful, you very much are still very much tied to your brother who may be in a situation in the inner city or in a rural area that is mired in poverty. You still facing some of the same challenging issues. And so I know, Claville, you've dealt with them. For example, I can tell you one of the big issues, the tax that comes around it, is just the misconception that being middle class is unusual. And then all of a sudden, you know, there's some assumption that black automatically means poor.
Right.
And so the kind of things that triggers, you know, just this assumption that black is automatically poor, and so being middle class is unusual. That in itself is one of the examples of the tax that comes along with it.
Absolutely. You know, Will, when you talk about living middle class, I think the definition of what middle class is also changed. And it means a lot different for African Americans than it do for white Americans, our white counterparts, because we just started living this lifestyle. So there are some opportunities and access to finance that we haven't received on par. Now, some of us have, right? But on par with our white counterparts, we're just not there, right? So case in point, what do I mean by that? There's a lot of issues with, you know, the value of our homes. You know, the value of our homes, we already know from stories that have come out, and we talked about it on LaVeist and Claville, where homeowners, if you're black living in a neighborhood, same neighborhood,
same neighbors, same house, same bones,
value
same structure.
Value 25% to sometimes 50% less than your white counterparts, right? So what happens there? That means that your ability to leverage your home equity, whether it be through a line of credit, whether it be to refinance your mortgage, to get a lower rate, a lower payment, put money elsewhere, diminishes tremendously.
Right.
And now you can't pay for that education for your kids' college so that they can start off debt-free. Now you can't add on to your home to build that extra bedroom or that office, the extra bedroom, to bring in your parents to live with you so they don't have to pay that extra cost, or that office so now you can work from home with your private business. Or you can't pull that equity and invest it and purchase a rental property or investment property and generate additional income, where now you're starting off at zero because the home is paid for. So everything that comes in is profit. So living middle class means something different for African Americans than it does for our white counterparts. I want to make sure that our listeners understand that. And again, just go ahead and look through your search engine, Black home ownership or Black devaluation of homes. You'll see stories that pop up, very recent stories that have popped up, and we've seen on major news networks to talk about this and the issues with appraisers and so forth. But you also mentioned something else, Will, that kind of gave me a chuckle, that we definitely would prefer this lifestyle than the lifestyle that we grew up in. Now, don't get me wrong, growing up, we had a very charmed upbringing with our father and mother, living at home and living in the neighborhood we lived in.
Right.
We understood. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. It was a neighborhood going through a transition, integration. So you had Black families, and again, I emphasize families, mother and father in the household, that were getting benefits from working, being able to be hired on jobs that the white counterparts were hired on. Matter of fact, my father had to join into a lawsuit in order to get hired permanently with the city where he grew up and retired from that job. Worked that job for almost 30 years, retired from it. Our mother worked at the best private company, big employer in the town, and had some of the best benefits that any employer would have in there. So it was that time period where, and then my father being military, he had the benefit of the VA mortgage loan. So we had that opportunity. And my father being a small business owner, we had the child care center, the daycare center in the community for 21 years.
Yeah, working class people, were able to, the economy was such that working class people were able to carve out a much more decent living because the cost of living wasn't astronomical what it was today. One salary could enable a family to be able to put money away and develop some measure of wealth and have a fairly decent lifestyle. Now it's become much more difficult.
Absolutely. And you bring up a very important point because, now we see those communities disappearing. We see that lifestyle disappearing, where now those communities have flipped. And the community I grew up in is totally flipped to the other side. So now you have, a lot of single parent homes, a lot of homes where you have a lot of dilapidation, a lot of homes where they're rental property. Don't get me wrong, they're still livable homes, but they're rental property as opposed to mortgages on them, investment for the most part. So, we go through cycles, and we know we go through cycles in our life, but living middle class, being an African American, a young African American professional, in a community of other established families, mostly white. In my community, you also have older white families as well. You stick out like a sore thumb, right? For the most part. So there's a lot of getting to know who these people are, right? And let's just say that in those communities like that, there's a lot of heightened noticing or being inquisitive, of who you are and things that you do, until you again create relationships and so forth and the like. And,
well, that sort of goes back to, again, what you pointed you made earlier when you talk about the housing values, which harkens back to what I said about this assumption that Black automatically means poor. So even here you are, a professional, you find yourself having done the things that society says you're supposed to do. There's still this assumption that you can't possibly really deserve to be here or really own that home, or because being Black is not supposed to equal you being able to own this home. And so like you pointed out, there's a study, two professors, Howell and Corver Glenn. They did this study, using census data. To your point about the devaluing of homes, they looked at homes from 1980 to 2015 and found that the value of white homes is almost 200,000 more, appreciated 200,000 more compared to homes owned by people of color and neighborhoods of people of color. Appreciate almost $200,000 more from 1980 to 2015.
So you know what $200,000 can do?
yeah, it certainly can put your children through college. It certainly can put them through college debt free and enable you to be able to give them a down payment on a home. So again, it's this assumption, and a lot of times these homes are the same homes, built, same buildings, same floor plan, built in these different communities, but this assumption that Black is less than, that Black is automatically poor, comes into play. And like you said, it also plays into suspicion. You know, how are you here? How are you doing this? There's this assumption that somehow you don't deserve the hard work that you put in to be who you are, to become to achieve the things that you achieve. Somehow you're not deserving of that. Somehow you didn't really achieve it honestly. Somehow it's like this cognitive dissonance that goes on. It's like you can't. All of my life I've been taught that Black equals poor, Black equals underachieving. How can you possibly have bucked that stereotype?
Exactly.
So now you get this, like you said, you get all these outgrowths, you get all these things of distrust, these second looks that go on in the neighborhood. And so now, like I said, it's this quandary of, I don't want to say it's not exactly all of what it's cracked up to be, but you find yourself now in a community that you can't fully feel comfortable and at peace in the way that you have expected that your hard work and all of what you put into it to achieve would have afforded you.
Absolutely. And well, with that, you also look at a diminishing of your value and what you've accomplished as well. That takes place through discriminatory means where, oh, well, maybe you got this because somebody gave it to you. No, we work for this. Even if we had the opportunity to go to the university that we went to, we still had to fight the practices that tried to keep us out, tried to keep us from achieving and the like.
Man, both of us have doctorates. They're not giving doctorates away. I don't care who you are. They're not giving us away. Not in this country.
Look, you got to pass that certification. You got to pass that dissertation. You got to pass that licensing exam. Right. You got to pass all of that before you get to that point. So, listen, you and I, we're cut from a different cloth, right? So, sticks and stones will break our bones, but words, they hurt, but they ain't gonna hurt them, but they ain't gonna stop.
No, I'm not gonna get caught in my feelings because of what you said and what you think. And in fact, like you said, I'm thankful for the kind of upbringing that we both had where, our parents helped us to understand that, look, people's negative perception of you is not your fault or your problem. It's more of a reflection of their own low self-esteem, their own insecurities about you and your presence and what it means for them. Anyone who is really secure in themselves doesn't have a problem with chopping it up, with being in the same space, with interacting with somebody else who has achieved as well. And so, we've experienced, that as well. But, I think about, again, talking about the upbringing, one of the challenges that I know that I found was, again, having been raised in an inner city, tough neighborhood, certain lessons and certain survival skills that you learn in that kind of environment, right, are not necessarily transferable when it comes to raising a family in a suburban, middle class community. And that's some of the things that I saw, man.
You had to dial it back a little bit.
Yeah, raising a family. I talk about, I often laugh about things like as simple as, leaving the garage door open. And I'm saying, look, no, you don't leave the garage door open. And my kids looking at me like, why are you tripping, Dad? We in the suburbs, and they would say things like, you're not in the hood. But you and I know better. We know that in every community, there's crime and there's break-ins and there are things that are going on. So it's like, again, one of the benefits that we have of coming up in that kind of environment is that we have an understanding that, look, people are people. And
Absolutely.
just because I'm in this environment that's suburban and society and the stereotypes say is supposed to be pristine and better, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. In fact, the more that we learn, the more that we know, we get to realize, look, all you have to do is look at a lot of these police stats and you see that break-ins occur in these communities. At me as being a reporter, I know, and I knew that the police and a lot of the drug dealing also not only went on the South Side, but went on uptown and Midtown. It's just behind doors. So
Right.
one of the challenges that comes along with it is that when you know these things, you understand the society that you're in. You see the injustices, and you see the lies, and you see the what's the word I'm looking for? The myths. It's hard for you to be able to function and try to, cloud your own eyes to the myths that you know that are before you and still have to navigate them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Will, I mean, this topic can go very, very deep. There's so many angles to it. And some of the things that it's not talked about a lot, because when you talk about growing up middle class or living middle class, the pool of African Americans are very small, as opposed to those that are in communities that we grew up in that are still struggling, marginalized in a lot of areas. But these things happen, and even to the point where you start to excel above those who are in the community. That's also a tax on you as well, because now we knew you were good, but we didn't think you were that good.
Right.
In fact, there's a recent story, it's actually a couple, and this has happened many times, but a couple of stories where individuals were Black females and Black females and also other African American male actually got the valedictorian or the salutatorian of their school. But then they went back and changed the formula so that it ended up being a tie with someone white and someone Black. You see stories like that. And of course, you're in a suburban school community where this is quote unquote our school. You're here, we accept you, but you're not supposed to do better than us, right? So there was pushback there. And even when you play by the rules and you dominate, there's still a pushback, to the point where it's blatant and almost cheating, where it's done. And we see it in politics all the time. We talk about it on this show and also others. So, there is a expectation, like you said, of less than that you are not supposed to go above. But we know as African Americans, we've always excelled. It's just being recognized. Again, being recognized, getting credit, respect, and the benefit of the doubt. Those are the three intangibles that I believe dictate the tangibles of discrimination and racism. So if you look at our achievements over the course of time, we have prevailed. We continue to persevere. We continue to push toward the mark. We continue to do great things, and this is just one additional tax upon doing that. So we get it. You and I, we get it. We understand it. Because we have not only been the Black face in our community, work communities, the Black face in our school community. I never forget, in my graduate program, I was the only Black person in there, not Black guy, but only Black person, in that particular program. And it was a good program, don't get me wrong, but still, I knew there was a spotlight on me. And that's something that when we grow up middle class, when you're living middle class, and I think that's another show that we have to talk about. When we're living middle class, you and I, but our kids grew up middle class. Right?
Well, that's kind of it. I mean, that's kind of what I was alluding to. You got your kids growing up middle class, and you're trying to bring some values, that those working class and those, values of the intensity of the community that you lived in.
Absolutely.
And they're not seeing the same blatant things that you're seeing, right? It's not coming at them in a blatant way, but we still have the knowledge and the wisdom to understand it. It's still the same stuff. It's just coming in a different form. And if a lot of times you're trying to enlighten them that this is what's going on, and you don't necessarily have those tools in your toolbox to help them to understand it in the context that they're seeing. And so it causes this, divide oftentimes. I mean, you talk about the pushback. Another piece of the pushback that I've actually seen, again, like my kids dealing with, is, again, this perception that Black is less than, or being authentically Black looks a certain way. It looks that inner city, in the hood kind of way. Like it's as if we don't have this broad spectrum of who we are. Being Black is what you tend to see, or at least when, a couple of decades ago. So I think the media has gotten a little bit better with showing a different, broader range, but still is very much a problem that being Black has a certain look to it. And you hear the kid talking about it's ghetto. And I'm like, again, as somebody that grew up in that environment, I knew and know that strong values exist in those environments. And bad people and good people exist in those environments too. But what happens is
in every environment.
In every environment. But what happens is the negatives get over projected about that environment. So now that becomes what authentically Black means. So now you take a middle class kid now that's coming up in a different environment, that's looking at that, looking at those images on television, and now wants to emulate that. So here you are, maybe you've come out of and seen the results of that kind of negativity in those environments, and know what the struggle is like, and know what the lie is like, that there's a lot of people in those environments who are doing the right things every day, but their stories are not being told.
Right.
Now you got your middle class kid that's looking at those negative images and wanting to emulate that as somehow being authentically Black. So now, instead of going from your shoulders up into and taking advantages of the benefits, the things that you afforded to them, the access you've given them, they're underachieving. They find themselves underachieving. And I've dealt with and have many parents, in the community that I raised my kids in, south of Chicago, Homewood, Flossmoor area, struggling with that very same thing. Man, how do we get our kids to understand, no, this is, you have been afforded access to things that we need you to take advantage of.
Full advantage of.
Yeah, full advantage of. Don't buy into the negative stereotypes that's being projected about the South Side of Chicago, as if that's all that's going on in the South Side of Chicago.
Absolutely.
You got people working hard every day, doing the right things in the South Side of Chicago, in the West Side of Chicago. Don't buy into that negativity. So look, it's a tax.
Look, well, man, listen. I mean, you're on my soapbox, because I knew that existed, and also the underachieving, thinking that the world is like Disney. No, it's not. Not for African American. So my wife and I, we kept it real with our sons, and it was that time period where you got to have that talk. So we had a couple of talks. We had to talk about, you being Black in America and dealing with issues of police stops and so forth, but also you being Black and being intelligent and achieving and knowing where you come from, right? That stock you came from. So our kids had the advantage of their mother, coming from another country to this country, growing up in another country, but then coming here where, the floor and you had to walk to school, it was dust, right? So it's a different expectation. And then coming from the stock that we came from, there's also another different expectation. If you in our home, if you started life lower, income wise and status wise than where your parents were, that's almost a failure. But I remember my first job out of undergrad, finished college. My father helped put us through college, and I went to school partially on a GI Bill and things of that nature, and left school with relatively almost zero debt. Very little debt. Undergrad. Again, undergrad.
The game changed afterwards, huh?
Yeah, game change. Listen, again, because his job was to get us started off.
Right.
He gave us a phenomenal first start. As a matter of fact, I teased my wife because when we married, we didn't have any kids, and we both had great jobs coming right out of college, and I mean, look, we were traveling out of the country and all that stuff, but kids change that, priorities change. But my point being is, the first job that I got out of undergrad, just finished school, just walked across the stage, get a contract in the mail, agreement, and so forth. The salary that I started is the salary of my father retired.
Wow. That's shoulders up, shoulders on up.
That is the mark of shoulders up.
Right.
And when you talk at that time, it was early, it was late 1990s, early 2000s, where they, corporate America was, I had a car, had expense account, they paid gas card, insurance. Matter of fact, the car that my father was used, I had to give that back because I had no room for it. I mean, I had, and it wasn't just any car. It's like, here's our fleet, pick your vehicle out, right? So all these things, I saw it, and it made me sit back and say, wow, this is what it was all about. So I took that in part and started, that's where you got to go. So I told him, I said, listen, you won't borrow a dime or penny for school. There's too much money, because we know now, you and I, we know where that money is, Will. They should be getting it. We know the programs that they should be in and what they should not be wasting their time doing.
Exactly.
And then giving them, again, you talk about those real life examples, being honest with our kids. This is what it's going to be like, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the failures, the success, so that they can have an honest start, so that they can not live middle class, but they can live rich, right? So that's the next step. What is rich? And of course, we know in America, we value rich, by finances, but it's about living a rich life, and having more than you need, so that you can be able to do more than we did and more good, which is the rent that we pay, service, the rent that we pay on this earth, Will.
Right. And you point out the thing of shoulders, going from shoulders up, is another one of the challenges, because we're now at a time in society that across the board, this is the first generation that's coming along now that may not do as well as the generation that preceded it.
Right.
So for us, as you mentioned, a lot of the Black community came into middle class in around the 70s is when it started, as a result of the civil rights movement and bills that were passed, that led to opportunities to go to college and so forth,
Absolutely.
more affordable. And so now, just here we are in 2021, a couple of generations afterwards, facing the possibility of these next group coming and not doing as well as their parents or grandparents. And that's another part of the taxes that, again, we see, unlike our parents, didn't have a lot of knowledge or access to certain things and where things were, pointed us in the direction of education and said, I may not know what's on the other side of that door, but I know the answer is in that door. We were able to get inside the door, inside the room, and see and get an understanding of the things that need to be done to achieve. And then, as you said, a lot of cases where society is going, some of these gains, some of these goalposts are now being moved.
That's right.
It's like, okay, so if the things are being moved, and we need to be agile and be able to adjust and see what's going on. And our children, if they get too caught up into the nonsense and the distraction and all of this stuff that you get projected through the media and these lies about what is really going on, and just these certain examples of what Blackness is supposed to be and all of that,
that's right.
You start to lose sight of being able to take advantage of the things that are before you. So it's very frustrating as a middle class Black parent when now you have the knowledge and understanding of certain things that our parents didn't have the advantage of. You're trying to impart it. The goalposts are moved. you still got to be able to adjust on the fly. And you wonder sometimes, man, are our children, the next generation, going to be prepared to be able to take advantage of these things? So it's disheartening. And I forgot to mention that we need to be planning to finish well at the same time, planning for retirement. So how do you do all of this at the same time?
That's right.
It's challenging. It's challenging.
And Will, that's funny you mentioned that because, we're headed toward that stage where it's time to refocus on us, and not just us, but our children's children, right? So, learning, we learned early on, I was very fortunate to have someone in my life that really taught me about the power of life insurance and how you could position yourself, for, a better life for your children, but also for yourself when it comes time for, hey, maybe, in end of life decisions or, in healthcare and medical needs, but also if you want to finance some things for yourself, because you mentioned that $200,000 gap. We talk about education, but also you're also talking about being able to purchase outright a retirement home for you and your spouse.
Yeah.
And then sell that property and still have some profit left while you purchase your retirement property to live well with on top of your retirement income. So all these things we're learning now. But again, you learn better, you do better. And the key is to pass it down and part that up on our children, and also put some legal measures around it, such as a trust and some marks in order to access that.
To guard against their nonsense. to save them from their own natural minds.
Exactly. You say nonsense, but I'm going to talk like that. We talk back in our neighborhood, that foolishness. And to guard against that. But again, this has been another great discussion about the Black tax. Living middle class, and we talked about growing up middle class, our children, which is a segment we'll do in the future and talk more about.
We'll have to dig into that. Man.
Absolutely, but thank you so much again for joining us for this segment of LaVeist and Claville. Again, thank you for your support. Continue to watch, follow, share us on Facebook, our social media, and let us know how we're doing. If you have any questions, let us know that, and we'll see if we can provide an answer for you. Until next time. According to us, that's the way it is. We'll see you next time.